Well, good morning. This week commemorates 1 year from when COVID changed life as we now know it. And if you think back a year ago, remember what they said? Hey guys, if we just shut this down for 2 weeks, we'll be in the clear. Yeah, you remember that? Yeah. Just a little bit off. But boy, it is good to see you and super excited for what God is doing. We are in the middle of a series called Strong and Courageous. And our theme verse from this comes out of the book of Joshua, chapter 1, verse 5 and 6, where it says, be strong and courageous. This is God talking to Joshua, a new leader. He says, for you are the one who will lead these people to possess all the land that I swore to their ancestors. And so God gives Joshua this real quick motto, and he says, be strong and courageous. But I am going to be with you. And so we're going to talk today about another story from the book of Joshua and how that can apply to our lives today. If you were around in the 90s, a phenomenon swept the United States. It probably swept the whole world. I just didn't know the whole world then. But it became something that captured the hearts and the minds of everybody. In fact, if you went to a shopping mall at that time and walked down the center aisle, you would more than likely not come around a group of people who were standing there and who were just staring. What were they staring at? They were staring at something called the magic eye. Do you guys remember magic eyes? I've got one of them here for you to kind of look at. Basically, it's a random, weird-looking picture that if you stare at it just right, it goes from two-dimensional just mess into a three-dimensional. Now, if you're really good and you can see this one, there's a gigantic shark moving to your left, okay? So you got to really focus in there. Now, I got to be honest with you. I was not good at magic eyes. Is there anybody out there that just, you could, yeah, it's me. I couldn't do it. And so I'd be the guy in the mall, I'd be standing there and I'd be like going, I got nothing. I see dots and my eyes are bleeding, but I can't see. And somebody would say, well, you have to look at it like you have to unfocus your eyes. And so I would go, okay. Nothing. And they say, well, if you walk up to it and you get real close, and then you start to back away, you'll see it. And here's the thing. I wanted to see it. I desperately wanted to see that shark, just like some of you are still going, like your eyes are starting to tear up. All right, blink every once in a while, okay? I wanted to see it, but it was just, I couldn't see it. I knew it was there, but I couldn't. There'd be other people that would walk up, and this is what drove me crazy. These little kids would walk up, and they go, oh, what's that? Oh, the magic eye. Oh, cool, that's great. And they'd walk away in like 3 seconds. And I've been there for like 45 minutes, My eyes are bloodshot, I'm just like, oh, I can't see it. And I had a hard time seeing. In fact, when I was doing this on my computer in my office this week, if you go up there, my monitor has like some nose prints where I was like going, okay, come on, you can see the dolphin jumping through the hula hoop. It's going to be great. You can see the unicorn. I have a hard time seeing that. But here's what people were trying to tell me is that when we focus in the right way, it changes what we see. And in fact, when we focus, it changes what we do. Depending on what we focus on can change our actions and can change a lot of things. And I got to be honest with you, sometimes I feel towards God the way that I feel about magic eyes. Anybody there with me? Where you're like, God, I know you're there. I'm looking. Like, God, I know you got something there, but all I see is this junk going on, and I can't see everything. God, I want to see, and I'll just be nothing, right? And it's hard because we want to focus on God. God, just tell me what you want me to do. God, tell me what you want me not to do. God, answer this question. God, give me some advice. And we're pleading to God, and we're looking, and we're staring with everything that we have. But it's hard to see sometimes, isn't it? Well, today we're going to be studying about the Israelites in the Old Testament when they had a similar problem where God was saying they wanted them to focus on Him. but they had a hard time. So if you have your Bibles or your devices, open them up, turn them on, and we're going to Joshua chapter 3. Joshua is in the beginning of the Bible. It's the sixth book. We got Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua. So as you're opening and getting there, Joshua chapter 3 is where we're heading. We're going to camp out there in the book of Joshua because we're going to see something really important. We're going to see that our focus determines what we do. So Joshua chapter 3, we're going to see how God instructs his people. So we're going to start in verse 1, and let's read it together. Early the next morning, Joshua and all the Israelites left Acacia. And they traveled to the Jordan River, and they camped there before crossing over it. After 3 days, the officers went through the camp and gave orders to the people. Well, what did the officers say to the people? As we go on, it says, when you see the priests and Levites carrying the Ark of the Covenant, leave where you are and follow it. That way, you'll know which way to go since you've never been here before. But do not follow too closely. Stay about 1,000 yards behind the ark. There's a couple things I want to draw out of this verse right here. The first one is the Ark of the Covenant. We're not talking about Noah's Ark, the big ark. We're talking about the ark that represented God's presence. It was about 27 inches wide, about 27 inches high, and it was almost 4 feet long. It was covered in gold, and on top of it, it had 2 cherub angels that faced each other. And this was the place that represented God's presence. In the Old Testament, anytime people could look and they could see the Ark of the Covenant, it was God's promise that he would never leave them and he would never forsake them. And so this was a special place, a special thing. And so God says, when this moves, you move. But the second thing he said something that seems a little strange. He says, I want you to stay 1,000 yards away. 1,000 yards is roughly, give or take, about a half a mile. If you were to go out of the front doors of our church, the hospital is about a half a mile right up the hill. It's not that far, but it's kind of far, isn't it? And so I was thinking this week, I was like, why would God want people to stay that far away? I thought, well, I went spiritual first. I said, well, because God is so holy, and this is representing his presence that we are not, so he wanted us to have a little bit of distance. That's probably a good reason. That makes some sense. But then I started to do a little more study, and I found out that the children of Israel that were camped there, it wasn't like a family reunion where they all got the T-shirts, okay? There was 2 million people that were right there. So can you imagine what would happen if you had this little golden box right here, and 2 million people are on the shore of this Jordan River, and they start approaching it, and about 20 people get around it and surround it. Nobody else can see what's going to happen. So I think that God was saying, hey, stay back a little bit because you're going to see something incredible. You're going to see what I can do. And it kept his presence. It was close enough that when somebody could look and see that, they could say, God is near. But it was far enough away that they couldn't tell exactly where he was going or what he was doing, and so it caused their faith to grow. So God instructed his people. The next thing he did was that he promised his people. In Joshua chapter 3, verse 5, here's what it says that his promise was. Joshua told the people, purify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do great wonders among you. Some versions here, instead of purify, they'll say sanctify or cleanse yourself. In the Old Testament, whenever this happened, it was a complex set of things that somebody had to do. Whenever God says, hey, I want you to cleanse yourself and purify yourself, you had to wash your body to get rid of just all the dirt and stank and stuff, okay? Because God wanted them as clean as possible. But then you also had to wash all of your clothes and get out of the soil and everything out of it. And then the third thing you had to do is you had to purify your mind. You had to avoid anything that would distract you from what God was about to do. So the message goes out that they are to bathe and to wash and to purify, to get ready because God is going to do something amazing. And they had to get ready for that. So God promises that if he would do that. Now, I got to be honest with you. If I was one of the children of Israel, and we were about to enter across this river and enter into this land that God had promised us, and I was one of the soldiers, I'd be like, okay, God, I'm all clean. I'm ready to go. My mind's good. My body's good. My clothes are good. All right, what's the battle plan? I'm ready to go. All right, should we be sharpening the spears? because mine's sharp. How about checking the shields? Oh, yeah, we got to do that. Hey, should we meet with Joshua and kind of go over the battle plan? Like, are we going to do a straightforward attack? Are we going to split up? Are we going to do an end around? What's the plan of attack? And that wasn't God's plan for what he was going to do. This was not going to be a military invasion as they marched across the Jordan River. This was going to be something spiritual. God was going to go ahead. He was going to do something great, not the children of Israel. And I can imagine that they were crying out, God, come on, you got to give us a plan. You got to let us know. You got to let us know what's coming. God, we need a battle plan. And God comes back and he says, you don't need a battle plan because I've already given you a battle cry. Do you remember Joshua chapter 1, verse 5 and 6? Be strong and courageous. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. And then God goes on to say, I'm never going to leave you. I'm never going to forsake you. You see, they didn't need a plan because they'd already been given a promise. So God instructs his people, and then God promises people. And in Joshua chapter 3, verses 14, God begins to move. It says, so when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. Okay, so there's a couple things you need to know. The Ark of the Covenant was such a holy piece that nobody was allowed to touch it. So they had rings on the side, and they would pass these long poles through. And so the priests would grab these poles anytime it had to be moved and lift it up so they would never touch the Ark of the Covenant because that represented where God was. Okay? And so they were getting ready to move, and they were going to go ahead of everybody. And the Jordan is at flood stage. Now, the Jordan River is a place that we know where it is. It flows from the Sea of Galilee in the north all the way down to the Dead Sea, one of the lowest places on earth. During a regular season, it's 30, 40, maybe 50 yards wide, about as wide as this room is, and it's moving along pretty good. But at flood stage, the Jordan River changes dramatically. The nearby Mount Lebanon is covered in snow, and when the spring sun hits it, it begins to fill the rivers and the creeks, and it flows down to the point where at flood stage, which is what this says, it's about a mile wide. Have you ever seen a river that's a mile wide? If you drive up 65 to Louisville and you're right there on the bridge and you look at the Ohio River, in regular days, that's about a half a mile wide. So just imagine a flooding river twice that wide. It's moving rapidly. There's probably some whitecaps in it. There's a bunch of debris that's getting washed downstream. This is a nasty, ugly place. You don't want to go anywhere near it. And God says, follow the priests. Well, where are the priests going to go? Let's read what it says. It says, yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the waters flowing down to the Sea of Arabah, that is the Dead Sea, were completely cut off. So do you get the picture here? This is God's plan. 2 million people surrounding this ark. They're staying a half a mile away. And God said, here's the plan. Okay, priests, you're going to step into this raging, roaring, dangerous river. And that's the plan. Just time out for a second. Can you imagine the priests back in their tent that were going to carry the ark? Can you imagine what they were doing? Hey, guys, the plan is we're going to walk into that river. Okay, all right. So who's going to be in the front? Not me. Not me. I did it last time. I'm not doing this time. All right, here's what you're ready. Oh, I should have chose paper, right? And they're in the front, and that's the plan. And at the exact moment that their feet touched the water dried up. The city of Adam was 16 miles to the north. I mean, it didn't just make a little pathway. God put wide Dixie Highway right there across the Jordan River. You know what I'm saying? He piled it up, and it drained all the way in the Red Sea, and it went across, and it was completely cut off. And then what happened next? We go on with the next part of the verse here, and it says, so the people crossed over opposite of Jericho. The priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan, and they stood on dry ground, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completely crossed on dry ground. God did a miracle. A miracle is when God works against the natural laws of nature, and he moved the water out of the way so 2 million people could cross by, but they didn't have to go through the muck and the mud and the junk. It says they went through on dry ground because God made a way right there where before there was no way. There was a flooding, raging, dangerous, rushing river. And it was great because the children of Israel finally, after centuries of being promised a promised land, were there and they were ready to go. Man, that's a great story, isn't it? That's a wonderful story of how God worked through his people thousands of years ago. But if you're like me, I have to ask myself, what's that mean for me? I mean, I love it that they had this story where they walked down, the second they put through, oh, it's dry. Hey, great, let's go across, dry land. Hey, we're in the promised land. Like, that's great, right? What's that mean for you and for me? Well, here's what I believe. I believe that God never changes. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. I believe that the Bible is God's word and all God's words are true. And so what that means is if it was true for Joshua and the children of Israel, guess what? It's true for us today. Do you believe that? If it was true for the children of Israel, then it is true for us today. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to take a look at 3 bold moves that God made, and then 3 actions that the people who focused on him were able to do. So 3 moves of God and 3 actions, because we know what we focus on determines what we do. The first thing is this, is when God instructs, we obey. When God instructs, we obey. So God gave some instructions. One of the instructions was, you need to stay a half a mile, 1,000 yards away from the Ark of the Covenant. And it made me wonder, what in my life, I asked myself this question, what in my life is 1,000 yards away? What in my life am I standing there staring at going, God, I can't figure it out. I don't see how you're working. I don't know how this is going to end. God, I just don't know what to do. It's like I can see it, but it's so far away. What in our life is 1,000 yards away that we can't see? And it goes back to, when God instructs, we obey. And so I don't know if you're like me, but I go, okay, what does God say? All right? So I'm going to search the Bible, see what God says. So I go to 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 16. And it says, if we have our eyes and we're focused on Jesus, that we need to help those in need. And I'm like, oh, that's good. I got that one. Check, right? I help those in need. If I see somebody in need and I can help, buddy, I'm helping, right? That was good. I like that one. That was easy. And then I go to the next one, which was Colossians 3:13. And it was, forgive as you've been forgiven. And I'm like, oh, that's a little tougher. That's a little tougher. I mean, like, I don't have anybody that I really need to forgive a lot right now, except for the person driving below the speed limit in the fast lane. But that's a little thing. That's not a big deal, right? I can forgive because God's forgiven me a lot. I'm like, okay, I'm forgiven pretty good. And I go on and I read Luke chapter 6, verse 27. And it says to love your enemies. And I'm like, okay, like, I don't have any enemies, right? I mean, I got some people that I just don't ever want to see again in my life and care for. But I wouldn't, enemies, strong language, right? And then I kept reading that verse because God got me again. He goes, love your enemies. And then this is what, you know what he said? And pray for them. Seriously? Like pray they have a slow and painful death? Yeah, I'm all in, God, right? I do not think that's what God was talking about when he said, love your enemies and pray for them. So that one I kind of left like incomplete. You know, I'm like, I'm not really going to check. I'm not really going to check that one. And I was doing pretty good. You know, I look at one that says, love one another. Oh, yeah, I love one another. Honor your mother and father. Oh, yeah, that's a good one. I can do that. You know, keep your word. Don't lie. Okay, I'm doing good. And then I stumbled across Philippians chapter 2, verse 14. You ever have one of those scriptures that you just can't explain away? You can't joke away. It just hits you? Philippians 2:14 said this, do everything without grumbling and complaining. I went, You see, I've had a rough couple weeks. And I've had a lot of things that haven't gone the way that I thought they should go. And I'm not saying that I grumble and complain. I mean, well, my philosophy is more like this. I point things out, that need to be changed. So obviously, so we can have a workable solution, right? It's totally different than grumbling and complaining, except a lot of times when I point things out that are wrong, I don't really have or care about the solution. I'm just more into pointing, I grumble and complain. Any grumblers and complainers out there with me? Okay. Boy, it's easy. It's easy, isn't it? And I can't find a way through this, around this, or over this. I'm like, God just says, do everything. Like, I think everything means, probably, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but everything? Without grumbling and complaining? All right, so God, when you're saying, like I'm ready for bed, I brush my teeth, and my wife says, hey, did you remember to take out the trash? Is that everything? Or is that like outside of everything? Because I'd like it to be outside, because it'll be there in the morning. Yeah. You see, here's what happens, is when God instructs, we have to obey. When we focus on Him, it determines our actions. And that means when we're focused on Him, our actions are going to be a little bit different than a lot of other people. So my focus has got to be on God to determine what I do. The second thing is when God promises, we prepare. God told the children of Israel, He said, hey, you need to be prepared because I'm going to do something big tomorrow. And so He promised them that. And so I was walking through this week, and I said, okay, what are some of the promises that God has given us? We already know Joshua 1, 5, and 6. It says, be strong and courageous. As I was with Moses, I'm going to be with you. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. And then I jumped to another one of my favorite scriptures, Philippians chapter 4, verse 13, which says, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I think about Romans chapter 8, verse 28, which says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him. Man, those are some good promises, aren't they? I mean, I'm starting rolling through God's promises. Romans chapter 8, verse 31, it says, what shall we say then? If God be for us, say it with me, who can be against us, right? Oh, we love that promise. Romans chapter 8, verse 35 and 37 talks about how when we walk through the dark periods of time, that it says, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Will trouble? Will hardship? How about persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? No! In all these things, we are more than conquerors through Jesus who loved you. Man, I love the promises of the Bible. Do you guys love the promises of the Bible? When God makes a promise, then we have to begin to prepare. Now, I like the first half of that, God's promise, because then when I look at the story of the children of Israel and see what they had to do to prepare, it starts to hit a little close to home, because they had to eliminate everything from their life that wasn't clean. God's meddling now, isn't He? They had to wash out everything that wasn't pure. They literally had to take off their dirty clothes of their life and put on clean clothes. They had to eliminate the things that distracted them from God and focus on God. Man, I like the promise. To prepare? That's a little bit harder, isn't it? It's harder for us to prepare. But we have to rely on God's promises. So when God instructs, we obey. When God promises, we prepare. Here's God's big one. When God moves, we move. You remember the scripture? When the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant, the presence of God, walked up to the edge of the flooded, raging river, there was no way across. They literally had to take their foot and step on dry ground. as the waters miraculously parted. Can you imagine what went through the children of Israel who were standing there on the shores of this river? 2 million of them seeing what was happening. They were going, there's the priests. They're right at the edge. They stepped. Oh, God, right? Only God could do that. And the question that I had to ask myself is this. When I find myself at the edge of the raging, rushing, flooded rivers of life, where's my focus? Am I looking at this going, there's no way. Like, I'm staying as far away as I can. I can't get through. I guess I'm just stuck. I'm just going to stay here. Or is my focus going to be on God? Because where you focus, it determines your actions. What are we going to do? And I think all of us have found ourselves in this situation. Maybe you're coming up to the edge of the river because you're facing a health crisis. Or maybe someone that you love is nearing the end of their life. And you're standing there going, God, I don't see any way around this. This is just going to take us over. And God says, are you going to step into the river? Are we going to trust that if we focus on Him, God will make a way where there was no way? Are we willing to act and to see what God can do? Maybe you're facing a battle of addiction. And every single day is a struggle. Every single hour, every single minute is instruction. And you're standing there, God, there's no way. This river is about to take me over. There is no way across. And God says, are you going to trust me with the racing rapids to be able to go into recovery and get some help? And God says, if you focus on me, I will make a way where before there was no way. Because if God did it in the Old Testament, God can do it today. And He is. You know, I think about our marriages, not just in our community, but inside of our church. And it's been a tough year. I think about the pain that has been inflicted on each other. And you're saying, God, it's too big, it's too wide, it's too fast, there's no way. And God says, are you willing to step into the flood of forgiveness so that I can make a way where before there was no way? And we're standing there, and we have to decide, are we going to step in and allow God to work? I think about our kids. Some of us have kids that are making decisions that we just wish they wouldn't. They're leaving behind them kind of a trail of destruction. We pray for them and we beg with them. And we have to say, are we willing to step into the deep water? I think about finances, about how the world has been turned upside down. And we're standing there, we're saying, God, there's no way. I don't see how I can get to the other side. I'm just going to go under and drown. And God says, are you going to trust me to step into the deep water and to trust that I can make a way where there is no way? You see, where our focus is determines our actions. If we're focusing on the flood, that's all we're going to see. But if we focus on God, He can make a way where there isn't a way. Our daughter Morgan, when she was a freshman in high school, felt God's call on her life to become a missionary. And 8 years later, she's ready to graduate from college, and she is way more excited about being a missionary across the world than her mom and dad are, about having her all across the world. But we're excited for what God is going to do. But I will never forget her first big international mission trip. It cost several $1,000s, and Jill and I, we wanted to support her the best that we could, but there was no way that we could just pay for the whole thing. And so Morgan wrote some letters to family and friends and people that she knew, just asking for them, first of all, to pray, but second of all, if they would be willing to give financially, that would be great. I'll never forget one night, Jill and I were in our room, or we went into Morgan's room to get ready to put her to bed, and she was really upset. Morgan, what's wrong? She said, well, tomorrow at 9 a.m., if all of our money isn't in, we can't go on the trip. I said, well, Morgan, you know, weeks ago, we prayed about this, and we felt that God was calling you to this, so God's going to provide. She goes, Dad, it's $325. She goes, I don't have that money. And Jill and I kind of looked at each other like, yeah, we're tapped out too. We didn't have it. But my wife, Jill, sat on the bed next to Morgan, and she just said to her, honey, if this is God's will for your life, he's going to make a way. And then we prayed for her, and as we were walking out of her room, I pulled a big dad move. You know, at that special moment, I said, hey, Morgan, did you get your chores done? You know, that's the dad move. And she goes, oh, I forgot to get the mail. And she walks out the front door, and a minute later, she bursts in the door, and she's screaming. I thought she'd been attacked by a dog or fallen down or something, you know. And she's holding this. She goes, Dad, you'll never believe it. And I go, what? And she read this letter where this lady said, hey, I was wanting to send you this money 2 weeks ago, but it got lost in a pile on my counter. And here it is. I hope it's not too late for you to be able to go on your trip. And she held up the check. Do you know what the number was written on that check? $325. You see, it just proves that when we focus on God, he will make a way where we don't see a way. No matter what we're facing, no matter what's in that river, no matter how wide it is or deep it is or swift it is, no matter what's going on, we say, God, I can't. And God's like, you're right. But guess who can? I can. Because God will make a way where there is no way. Where we focus determines what we do. And I love hearing stories about that when God begins to work. But you want to know something? This story of the children of Israel crossing the Jordan River, it's a cool story. But it's not the best story to happen at that exact same spot. You guys want to hear the best story to ever happen at the same spot at the Jordan River, right there by the city of Jericho? 1,400 years after the children of Israel crossed over into the promised land, there was a man who was doing ministry, and his name was John the Baptist. One day, his cousin came to him to get baptized. John's cousin was Jesus. Jesus stood in that same river and was baptized by John. Not because Jesus had ever made a mistake, but because he wanted to set the example. He wanted to say, you know what? When you think about eternity, you don't have a chance. There's no way you can be good enough or give enough or serve enough or nice enough to make it there because we make mistakes. We sin. Jesus set the example. Jesus made a way for us to spend eternity with God where there was no other way. You know, when we focus on God, it changes what we do. And I just wonder if for some of you, when you think about God, you're looking at that magic eye, and it's confusing. And you know something's there, but you just can't see it. Maybe you need to just take that step, and at the perfect moment, God will part the waters. Romans chapter 5, verse 8 says this, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He didn't wait for us to clean our life up because we can't. He said, you're a sinner. You don't deserve heaven. You're not heading that way. Boom. He makes a way and says, if you accept me. Man, I can't think of anything better than we can do than to take that step spiritually and say, God, I can't, but you can. God, there's no way, but I'm focusing on you. And you can make a way where there is no way. We're going to sing a couple of songs. Man, if this is your time where you're standing on the edge and your knees are knocking and you're scared to death about your relationship with God or anything in life, I want to encourage you not to miss this opportunity, but to take that step into the water because sometimes God doesn't move. God is rarely early, but he's never late. Maybe today is your day. If you're here in the worship center, we've got folks right over here on the right that would love to talk with you. In the student ministry building, we have a host if you'd like to make a decision. I'd love for you to do that as we sing. But church family, if you already know who God is, but you've been focusing on the floodwaters, it's time to lift your eyes to a God who can make a way.